gonna ask you a question and I want you to be very honest when answering it. How many times have you promised yourself you would get on monk mode or you would become disciplined only to fall off a couple days or weeks later? Is it 10 times, 50 times, 100 times? You don't have to feel ashamed of the number because if you're like most people, you will have a lot of attempts. I've gone through hundreds of these cycles over the last 5 years of making a promise to myself only to break it a couple days or weeks later. We're not very different from each other in that regard. We all go through these cycles. Now, I've become a lot better at controlling these cycles, and I found that the main reason these cycles happen in the first place is because people, you included, don't understand the discipline paradox. And although it's a very logical concept, people don't seem to get it, or they do get it, but they don't apply it. This video will help you understand what the discipline paradox is and how you can apply it in your own life and use it to consistently achieve very high levels of discipline throughout the coming years. It will also help you understand why your body falls back into a rut after a couple of weeks and how you can start to manage those ruts properly. So put this video on full screen and focus because this will help you a lot more than you're probably thinking. So the idea of discipline paradox can be explained through a simple story. In the 1400s, you had two knights. Both knights had a single desire, and it was to marry the king's daughter. Cheesy, I know, but there's a point at the end. So what they did is they each went up to the king, but unwilling to simply give his daughter to any knight without struggle, the king gave both knights a mission: traverse a 10,000-mile path by horse, and the first one to arrive gets to marry his daughter. So eager to win, the first knight gets on his horse and starts going fast. He really wants to get to his destination as fast as possible. The second knight, on the other hand, gets on his horse and has a chill approach. He understands that this is a long journey and he needs to be careful not to burn his horse out too quickly. After one day, the first knight seemingly has the advantage. He's way further ahead than the second knight and feels it's an easy win for him, so he keeps going and keeps pushing. The second knight is seen resting at the end of the day, relaxing after this long day of walking. Although he would still like to get some miles in, he prefers to rest and recover before walking the next day. Now, another day later, the first knight is still way ahead, but his horse is starting to slow down. He's starting to get exhausted because they went so fast for 2 days straight with barely having any rest. So what he does is he starts to whip his horse, forcing it to keep going even past exhaustion, but at some point the horse collapses and the first knight is forced to wait for the horse to recover. The second knight, on the other hand, is still going at a steady pace. He didn't push his horse too much beyond its limits and made sure to give him necessary rest every single day. Because of that, although he looked to be slower at first, he's starting to slowly catch up on the first knight. After a long afternoon and a night's rest, the first knight's horse has been able to recover, and stuck in his psychological ways, he decides to rush again, whipping him and pushing the horse way beyond its limits, leading the horse to collapse again after a day or two. The second knight, on the other hand, still maintains the same strategy. Give the horse rest whenever it needs and don't push it beyond its biological limits. Again, although he still wants to go harder than he is right now, he understands that his horse needs rest and can't be pushed too far. After a day, the first knight's horse has recovered again, and unwilling to learn his lesson, he keeps using the same methodology over and over again, until one day the horse passes away from being under too much physical and psychological stress, and he's forced to quit his mission. The second knight, although starts to find the journey a bit boring, still maintains a steady pace every single day. In the end, the second knight gets to his destination and marries the king's daughter. Now, this story isn't about two knights trying to marry the king's daughter. It's a representation of your relationship between your consciousness and your mind and body. It's a representation of how you approach self-improvement and discipline. In this story, the knight represents your consciousness, the part of your brain that makes decisions, thinks, and strategizes. The horse then represents your mind and your body, the things that need to execute on what your consciousness desires to achieve. The majority of people treat their mind and their bodies in the exact same way that the first knight treated his horse. They push them way past their limits without giving them enough rest and recovery. And if their mind and body begins to slow down, they metaphorically whip themselves to keep pushing further until they collapse and fall back into a rut. They break down and their body and mind forces them to go into a time of forced recovery, which we call a rut. A rut, as I like to define it, is a time of forced recovery after being under too much forced pressure. Now, on the other hand, some people act more like the second knight. Even though they seem to be slower at first and to be at a disadvantage, they understand something crucial about biology and biological structures. Living organisms have biological limits. They cannot be pushed past a certain limit for too long. They need an adequate amount of rest and recovery. It amazes me that so many people have this ego to think that their bodies are like these machines that can keep pushing and go on forever, but you have limits. And this is coming from a guy who's constantly pushes his body and mind too far. Like, I've done this so many times where I try to be super disciplined, but then after a couple of weeks, I would just break down and fall back into a rut. And so I kind of come to realize that if I keep falling into a rut every single time, maybe I'm doing something wrong. This idea that you need rest and recovery seems so logical, yet almost no one that is on self-improvement seems to understand this. They think that they need to keep pushing indefinitely until they get to their destination. They think they need to keep this monk mode discipline at all times for them to achieve their goals. Their conscious mind has all these goals they want to achieve, so they push their bodies and mind to insane lengths, but they forget to take into account that they have limits. And if those limits are crossed for too long, their body and mind shuts down, and that's why people who get disciplined or get onto monk mode fall off or start to get burned out after a couple of weeks. The way you can imagine this is through a battery system. Your body and mind work on energy reserves, and those energy reserves are stored in this metaphorical battery. At the start of your day, your energy reserves are full, and as you go through your day, those energy reserves go down. Now, if for example you've had a really long day where you've had to work all day, train afterwards, and also eat a ton of calories on top, to be able to do these things, you've likely had to borrow some energy from the next day. So if on Monday you've had this very productive day, you probably had to take some energy reserves from Tuesday. So on Tuesday you'll only have half the energy you would normally have. Now, if on Tuesday now you try and have a normal day, you'll need to borrow energy from Wednesday because you only have half of a battery left. And what people do is they keep having these very productive and disciplined days, and they think they can keep this up forever, but what they're actually doing is borrowing energy from the next days and weeks until their body says enough is enough and forces them into a rut to recharge their batteries. This is what we can call forced rest. This is where your body and mind have been pushed past their biological limits, therefore collapse and are forced to rest and recover. This is what happened to the first knight's horse. He was pushed so far that it collapsed and was forced to take rest. What we instead need to do is what we can call controlled rest. This is where you rest and recover in a controlled manner. This is where you don't push your body to insane lengths and actually allow it to rest and recover. This is what the second knight did. Every single day, he allowed his horse to rest and recover and gave it what it needed in order to be productive the next day. If you've been more like the first knight, trying to push your body and mind past their biological limits, which admittedly I've done many times and other people have done many times as well, trying this will be a hit to your ego. But if you can successfully do it, you'll be able to maintain good levels of discipline for a lot longer than you currently do. So if we had to boil down everything we covered so far and the entire concept of discipline into a single sentence, it would be this. Your ability to be disciplined and stay disciplined is based on your ability to manage and retain your psychological energy properly. If you want to grow, you'll need to push your body and mind. But if you push them too far for too long, your body and mind will shut down. What we need to learn to do is effectively manage our energy where we spend enough of it to grow, but not too much of it where our mind and body collapses. So the rest of this video will cover two main things. The first will explain where most people mess up in the whole cycle, and the second will explain how you can manage your energy properly. Now on this channel I speak about fitness and I make these videos for men trying to gain muscle, so I'll still focus mostly on solving the problem of not staying disciplined with dieting and training, but just know that this concept can be applied to anything productive you're trying to do, whether it's work, studying, or anything else. And the methods I'll share can be used anywhere. Now where I found most people mess up and where I always mess up is right before getting onto this discipline mode. If I could have a microphone and listen to exactly what was going on inside your head whilst you were making the decision to go on monk mode or to get disciplined, I can know with a lot of precision whether you're going to fail or succeed. Based on how you're thinking right before you get onto monk mode, I can know how it's going to end. See, people who get onto self-improvement almost always go through an up and down cycle, an oscillation of productivity and laziness, a cycle of progress and destruction. And what you'll see is that you have very specific emotions attached to each part of the cycle, and based on how you handle those, I can know whether you'll fail or not. So there are 4 distinct parts of this cycle. The first part is what I call the valley of misery. This is when you've fallen into a rut, when you've fallen off the good habits, when your screen time is at an all-time high. It's the part of the cycle that people want to avoid at all costs, especially those who care about improving their lives. Now, after a while of being stuck, they start to feel anger, frustration, dissatisfaction, and an array of negative emotions. And as we know, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be converted or transformed. So what happens with these emotions we feel, which are by definition energy in motion, will begin to transform themselves into drive or motivation. That is where the second part of the cycle comes in. After being stuck in the valley of misery for long enough, people start to turn their anger or dissatisfaction towards themselves into drive or motivation to improve again. They put their habit tracker back together, clean their room, and set everything up so they can get disciplined again. Now, the problem with motivation or dopamine is that it essentially casts a cloud over your neocortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, and you become unable to think as rationally as you previously would. What that leads to is people setting goals, defining daily routines, setting up training programs, and putting together diet plans that are completely unsustainable for them and will push them way past their biological limits within a couple days or weeks. So based on how you handle that feeling of motivation and drive is how I can tell whether you'll fail or not. If you let that feeling of motivation run wild and you begin to make changes that will be very unsustainable for you later on, I know you'll fail. But if you control that feeling and rationally think through changes you want to make, you're much better equipped to succeed in the long run. Now, if you cannot learn to control this drive, and motivation, there will be two other parts of the cycle. The first is when you get to the peak, when you've been very disciplined and productive for 2 weeks. At that point, the feeling of motivation and drive you once had starts to turn into pride. You start to feel proud about the changes you've made, about the things you've done in the past 2 weeks. But as it says in the Bible, pride goes before destruction, or as you might know it, pride comes before the fall. The second part is when your sense of pride starts to turn into comfort. You start to feel comfortable. You start to allow yourself some undisciplined behavior. This is where people start to decline, and most people don't even realize that it's happening to them. The first sign that you're about to decline is when you start to become confident that you got it. When you start to feel some sense of pride for the progress you've made. When you've lost that initial drive you once had. Then after a while of being comfortable, you end up back into a rut and the cycle then repeats. So as I already said, the determining factor of whether you'll fail or not is your ability to manage the feeling of motivation or drive. If you can take a step back and rationally think through the changes you want to make during that time, you'll be able to make better decisions and implement lifestyle changes that won't push your body and mind too far, which then means you'll be able to keep your energy reserves high enough and consistently stay disciplined throughout the months and years. You need that ability to take a step back and rationally think, otherwise you won't have the humility to implement the following methods we'll discuss. So previously we spoke about your body and mind being like batteries, and your ability to stay disciplined is based on your ability to manage the energy within those batteries properly. If you start to use too much, your body will force you back into a rut. But if you can just use enough and not go past your limits, you'll be able to maintain good levels of discipline for years to come. So in this section, I'll walk you through a series of methods that will help you make sure your batteries are filled with energy every day, make sure you don't lose or waste energy in unintelligent ways, and how you can recharge those batteries when you feel like you need to. So firstly, I want to discuss methods to avoid losing your energy and emptying your batteries too quickly. Just like you can empty a smartphone battery more quickly by running heavy apps, for example, you can empty your psychological and physical batteries by doing the wrong things. In order for us to consistently keep high energy levels, we need to make sure nothing is taking energy away from us in the first place. So the first thing we need to take care of is sleeping enough time and sleeping good enough. Sleep is obviously a very important part of things because it's a time where we regenerate our body's batteries. Not taking care of your sleep is like only charging your phone to 60 or 70%. You're missing out on a lot of energetic potential to use towards good behaviors. So we first need to make sure our sleep is on point. To do this, we first need to set our foundations in place. This means making sure you have a specified bedtime and specific time range in which to wake up at, making sure your last caffeine consumption is early enough, 8 hours before bed will be enough, making sure your last meal is early enough as well, 2 to 3 hours before bed, and making sure you don't have too many bright lights, especially blue ones before bed. Second, we need to have a proper morning routine to regulate our circadian rhythm. This means viewing bright light, preferably sunlight, as close as possible to the time you wake up, moving your body in some way. I like walking because it combines sunlight and movement, hydrating your body with water and electrolytes, salt is also good, and exposing your body to some form of cold. This one isn't as necessary, but it can help. All these things will cause a healthy, natural cortisol spike in your body, which will help your body wake up and regulate its circadian rhythm. Then we also need a proper evening routine to regulate our circadian rhythm even more. This means exposing yourself to warmth, warm showers or warm baths, stretching slightly, and slow breath work. All these things will release a healthy dose of melatonin, helping you fall asleep properly and making sure your sleep quality is also better. You could also add some supplements like L-theanine, magnesium threonate, and glycine. Then, if you fully want to optimize your circadian rhythm, start eating at the same times each day, training at the same time, and routinizing your life as much as possible. Your circadian rhythm is your biological clock. It likes to know when it should spike cortisol to wake you up, melatonin to get you sleepy, ghrelin to make you hungry, and so on. It likes routine and predictability. If you truly want to maximize your internal clock, keep very predictable and routinized behavior. So if you follow these steps, it should be enough for your sleep. The second thing we need to take care of is our dietary consumption. Food to our body is like fuel for a car. If you give a car bad fuel, it won't run properly. But if you give it good fuel, it will thrive. So we need to make sure our diet is on point. To do that, the first thing we need to understand is that it is not so much about what you eat, it is more about what you don't eat. See, our gut is often considered as our second brain. It's connected to our brain via something called the vagus nerve, and when you eat something, it directly impacts your brain. This comes down to an idea in computer science called garbage in, garbage out, which essentially means that when you feed a system bad inputs, it will give you bad outputs. And the exact same thing is true with your body, your car, or anything else. If you give a system bad inputs, it will not give you good outputs. If you give your body bad foods, it will not give you good performance. So as I said, it comes down a lot more to what you don't eat than to what you eat. And I can tell you this is true because over the years, I tried many different diets, and the best results I've gotten in terms of keeping my cognitive energy levels high was when I removed bad things instead of adding good things. The real results come from removing things, not adding things. So here's a couple things you can remove. The first is seed oils, the second is sugar, the third is sweeteners, the fourth is artificial foods, and the fifth is processed foods. All these things will create a lot of inflammation in your gut and brain and will leave you foggy, anxious, depressed, and low energy. And if you're wondering what this leaves you with, if you cut out all these things, there are single ingredient foods like steak, rice, vegetables, fruits, and so on. All foods that your body was actually designed to eat. So avoid crap foods and focus on actual real foods. Garbage in, garbage out. The second thing we need to understand is that you should keep your food quantity within what's biologically sustainable for you at the moment. Remember how the first knight kept pushing his horse past what was biologically sustainable for that horse. The same holds true for your diet quantity. Your body has to allocate energy to digest every calorie you consume that puts you in a surplus. So the more extra calories you consume above your maintenance, the more energy your body has to allocate towards digesting those calories. Many guys will go on these massive bulks, and I've done these myself, but they become very quickly exhausting, especially mentally. Your body has to handle all these extra calories at once, and it has to expend so much energy to deal with that major surplus. So try your best to keep your calories within a reasonable range. That means no more than a 500 calorie surplus every single day. If your maintenance calories are 2000, you don't want to eat above 2500 calories. Now the third thing we need to optimize is our training practices. Training and working out require energy, and if your training is beyond what your body is capable of maintaining, over time, if you keep training too much, you will start to borrow energy from the future and eventually burn out. The majority of people don't need to worry about this because most people train like absolute pussies, but if you happen to be part of that rare 5% who does train too hard, you need to learn to cut down on volume and intensity, because after a couple of weeks of doing that, your body will start to slow down and lose motivation to act. And again, the reason that happens is because you're pushing your body too far, so it fights back. So keep your volume and intensity hard enough so you grow, but not too hard where you're burning too much fuel. The fourth thing we need to watch out for is not overloading our CNS or our central nervous system. Our CNS is what it says it is. It's part of our nervous system. And what it essentially does is receive, process, and respond to sensory information from our environment. It takes different sensory stimuli from our environment and processes them. And what a sensory stimulus is, if you're wondering, it's any piece of information that our body receives through one of its 5 senses. Either you hear something, see something, smell something, touch something, or taste something. And in all cases, your CNS is responsible for digesting that information and processing it. Now the problem is that most people overload their CNS. They put too much pressure on it, and it's one of the reasons why someone can feel lethargic, tired, and without energy. If your sleep is on point, your diet is on point, and you're not overtraining, your feelings of tiredness and low energy probably have something to do with your CNS. So here's a couple things that people do which puts a lot of pressure on that system. Very bright lights, especially blue ones, frequent loud music, short-form content, pornography, junk food, drugs, alcohol, and so on. Any stimulus that is very stimulating will put a lot of pressure on that system because there's so much information to process. If we take the example of loud music, if you've ever listened to 3 hours of hardstyle music in a row, you'll feel exhausted afterwards because you've stimulated that system way too much. If we take the example of short-form content, you'll feel exhausted after scrolling for 2 hours straight. Pornography is the same thing, it's a very strong stimulus. Drugs and alcohol are extreme stimuli to that system as well. Bright lights, although not as strong and bad as drugs or alcohol, will put a lot of pressure on your CNS. If you go to the dentist, for example, they'll always have these horrible lights above your head, and it just gives you a headache after a while. So if your sleep is on point, your diet is on point, and you're not overtraining, the main reason you get these feelings of low energy is because you're overloading your CNS with sensory information, and your goal is to essentially just reduce the amount of stimuli you give to that system. So cut back on the shorts, cut back on the loud music, don't have too many bright lights, not like I'm doing right now. Especially don't take drugs or alcohol, and just try and avoid extreme stimuli in general. You don't need to fully remove these things, but if you can reduce the amount at which you consume them, it will help a lot. Now, the fifth thing we need to avoid or take care of is drama in our lives. Drama is very seductive. It's attractive to our brains. It feels good, but it saps your cognitive energy, and it's very easy to fall into a vicious cycle where drama becomes a big part of your life. So there's a couple drama-filled things that will completely sap your energy. The first is the news. The news is a place of constant emotionally charged content designed to grab your attention and get you angry, frustrated, and irritated. It's filled with drama all the time. You'll constantly hear about wars, genocides, murders, and you just need to avoid all that garbage. And if you think you need to know what's going on, you don't. If it's really important, you'll know some way. So cut out typical news outlets if you even watch them, and cut out news channels on social media. Then the second thing is politics, which again is filled with constant drama. Especially around the time of an election, everyone's attention is drawn to this thing, even if it won't have a single impact on your life. You'll constantly be bombarded with things like, ooh, Trump said this about X, and X will respond at 4 p.m. It's like, you just want to avoid that garbage at all costs. Then we have social media, again a place filled with drama. Even if you only watch educational content, it's very difficult to avoid the drama. Like a couple of months ago, we had the Mr. Beast scandal, which everyone was talking about. We had the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight, which again, everyone was talking about. Social media is not very different from the news or politics in the sense that it's also filled with negativity and drama everywhere. And then the last thing you need to be careful of is friends or people. People just love talking about either the drama of their own lives or the drama they've heard from the news, politics, social media, and so on. You need to be careful of this because it's very easy to enter a cycle of just talking about drama with the people around you. Now, obviously, there are some cases in which you will have drama, like your parents divorcing or someone passing away, in which case you should get involved. But if it's simple day-to-day drama, you just want to avoid it. So what you want to do is start to be ruthless when it comes to drama in your life. Cut out news outlets, stick with purely long-form educational content on YouTube. You won't learn anything from short-form content. Cut out politics and keep strong boundaries about what you speak about with your friends. So the sixth thing, which is similar to something we've discussed in a previous point, and that is energy-consuming people. Some people in our lives have an incredible ability to exhaust us. If you spend 3 hours with these people, you'll need like 2 hours just to recover from that event. I can promise you learning to manage or remove these people will do wonders for your energy levels. You'll feel like a completely new person. Now, for some of you, you won't have anyone in your circle that is like this, and in this case, I'm very happy for you, you've truly been blessed. But for most people here, you'll have at least one person that sucks the energy out of you, and if you want to keep your energy levels high, you'll need to cut these people out. You have my permission. Now, obviously, if it's one of your parents or a sibling or a friend you've known for a decade, it's a little bit more tricky, and in that case, since you can't remove them, you have to learn to manage them and set clear boundaries for what you will and will not accept from them. But if it's anyone outside those people, just cut them out. By the way, if you're wondering how to cut people out from your life effectively, you do it in a slow manner by not going out as often or being busy more often, and that way slowly creating a distance between you and those people. Now, so far we've covered methods to fill and retain your psychological energy as much as possible. These included optimizing your sleep quality and quantity, optimizing your diet quantity and quality, optimizing your training quantity, avoiding CNS overload, avoiding drama, and avoiding energy-consuming people. These are all the methods which serve the purpose of retaining your energy as much as we can, but there will always be times in which we'll start to get tired and fatigue from being too disciplined, and in those cases we can use some methods to give ourselves some energy back. Kind of like recharging your phone for 15 minutes so you have 10% more energy. So the first method you could use to restore your cognitive energy, which is more of a long-term solution, is simply having breaks from your diet. If you stay within your current biological limitations, this shouldn't be a thing you need to do, but if you start to feel a bit tired from dieting, that's a thing you can do. Diet breaks, if you didn't know, are simply when you go back to your maintenance calories for a week or so. If you're bulking, you'll need to remove 200 to 500 calories from your diet every day, depending on the surplus you were in, and if you're cutting down, you'll need to add 200 to 500 calories to your diet, depending again on the deficit you were in. You should at least diet for 3 to 4 months before having a diet break, and if you feel like you need one sooner, you'll need to first adapt your diet to the point where it's more sustainable for you and you can actually maintain it for 3 to 4 months. The second method we can use, which is now the training side of things, is to have training breaks or deloads. This is when you cut back the volume of your training to a minimum for a week or so, and again serves the purpose of letting yourself recover physically and mentally. Once more, if you train right outside your limits, you shouldn't need something like this, but at some point, if you feel as though training becomes the cause of your psychological and physical exhaustion, you can take a deload week. The way this should be done is by keeping the frequency of workouts the same, so let's imagine you train 5 days a week, you will still train 5 days during that time, but the variables that will be changed is 1, the volume, which will be cut in half, so if you used to do 20 hard sets for a muscle group, you will now do 10 hard sets, and second, the intensity, which will be slightly reduced, so if you always went to failure, you'll now only go close to failure. Now, the third method we'll use is actually social recovery. In their book Peak Performance, Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus mentioned many forms of recovery they used for their athletes, and one of the methods they mentioned was cultivating fun and laid-back social environments where their athletes could hang out with each other. The basic biology of feeling connected to others has profound effects on stress physiology. What they essentially found is that their athletes recovered faster and better when they were surrounded by teammates in relaxing social environments, and many studies backed those findings up. A study was done in Bangor University in the UK, and they found that the ratio between testosterone and cortisol was higher, the higher the better, when athletes went through their post-game analysis in a social environment with friends than athletes who went through it in a neutral environment with strangers. So the lesson you can take from this is the following. Whenever you start to feel a bit tired from a journey, relaxing social interactions with friends can help you decompress and recharge those batteries. Then once you've relaxed a bit, you can get back on the grind. Now the fourth thing is something that I really like. It's about learning to manage your CNS properly and reduce the pressure we put on that system in our body so you feel less tired throughout the day and week. The thing with your CNS is that if you don't take care of it, it will be like a baby screaming and screaming until you do take care of it. And if you don't take care of it for long enough, that's when your body shuts down for like 3 days and you indulge in all your bad habits again. I really want you to take this seriously because that's where most of you guys fuck up. You might have your diet in check, you're training within good limits, and your sleep on point, but you're frying your CNS with hardstyle music, watching TikTok edits, taking way too much pre-workout, which by the way is also a very strong stimulant, frying that system, and never taking the time to do things that actually let that system rest and recover, and because of that you burn out. So here's a couple of methods you can use to recover that system. So the first thing is breath work. If you take a good 10 deep breaths right now, you'll feel your entire physiological state change. Your heartbeat will slow down, you'll feel more relaxed, your cortisol will go down, and your CNS will relax as well. Your CNS doesn't need much attention. If you just give it 10 deep breaths, you will be good for a while. Now the second thing is light cardio / walking. It has to be specifically light cardio like walking because that's a form of exercise that doesn't tax your nervous system and instead relaxes it because it's so calm. Now the third thing is napping. This is a very quick way to boost your energy throughout the day whenever you need it. Now if you're in your teens or 20s and you need frequent naps throughout the week, there's probably something you're doing wrong somewhere else. So if that's happening to you, go back to the methods we discussed before which could take energy away from you and maybe see if there's something you're doing in those things that could be the cause of your low energy. Now the fourth thing is doing nothing. This is something that I love, and it's the idea of just lying on your bed, staring at your ceiling for like a good 20 minutes. What this does is it removes all stimulants, and it allows your CNS to actually process all the things you've given it. During that time, you'll start having a lot of thoughts about things, and your brain will process all the information it's been given. Andrew Huberman mentioned something similar called body still, mind active, where your body is completely still while your mind is still active, thinking, having many different thoughts. Try this. Love doing it, and it works wonders when it comes to giving you that quick energy boost. Now the fifth thing is sauna. This is something you can potentially use as long as you 1. Have access to a sauna, which I don't, and 2nd, you don't overdo it. If you stick within a decent range of sessions, once a day is fine, it's possible to use this as a method to recover physically and mentally. Now the 6th thing is cold plunge. Similar to the sauna thing, cold plunges are something you can do a couple times a week and will help reduce inflammation levels and help your body and mind relax. Although it might not seem relaxing in the moment, it does help relax your nervous system. Now this is something you don't want to do right after a training session because it does slightly inhibit muscle growth, but a few hours after or before the workout is perfectly fine. Now 7th are massages. I would assume not everyone will have access to a weekly massage, but if you do, you can get a deep tissue sports massage, which will help you relax physically and psychologically. Now a few other methods will include exposing yourself to sunlight, grounding, and a few other methods, but these are the main ones. Now, if your goals happen to be more focused on work, building a business, or developing a career, managing your CNS is even more important. If your brain is the main thing responsible for achieving your goals, take care of that system as much as you possibly can like it's a newborn baby. Now, if your goals are more physical, like building your body up, it is still important to take care of this, but slightly less. So, to conclude this video, if you want to be disciplined and stay disciplined over the long run, you'll need to learn to exert enough energy to grow your body, but not exert too much where you burn yourself out too quickly. To retain as much energy as you can, make sure your sleep is on point, your diet is on point, you're not overtraining, you're not frying your CNS, you're not exposing yourself to drama at all times, and you're not surrounded by energy draining people. And to regain some energy back, you can have a diet break, training deload, social recovery, or recover your CNS through napping, breathwork, doing nothing, sauna, cold plunge, and so on. So one last time, your ability to be disciplined and stay disciplined is based on your ability to manage and retain your psychological energy properly. So that's it for this video. What I want you to do is implement 2 to 3 of the methods we've covered so you actually gain something from it and you're not just consuming content. And if you're new to this channel, my goal here is to revolutionize fitness education by focusing way more on the consistency side of things. Although I'm still focused on actual fitness stuff, I'm way more interested in dealing with addictions, discipline, consistency, and going in depth on these topics. So if you believe that's a mission worth fighting for, you can subscribe to the channel down below. And if you feel like I'm not respecting the channel mission, you have my permission to call me out on it. So that being said, hope you enjoyed the video. Peace.